Imagine being the undisputed architect of modern pop culture for like 2 straight decades. I mean, you've broken almost every commercial record in the book.
Right.
You dictate the fashion, the slang, the literal sound of global radio, and you built this empire from the absolute ground up. You are the blueprint.
Yeah, the literal foundation.
Exactly. And yet, after 20 years of this completely undeniable, measurable dominance, the most prestigious institution in your industry has never handed you a single one of its highest awards.
Not a single one.
Not one. So today, we're looking at how the music industry's most staggering paradox created a breeding ground for, well, probably the most complex and honestly often toxic rivalry of our generation.
It really is.
Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you are here with us because what we are unpacking today is massive.
Huge.
We're looking at a nearly 20-year-long narrative that has just fundamentally reshaped hip-hop, fan culture, and the very mechanics of how music is sold today.
It's a sprawling saga. It really is. And to do this justice for you guys listening, we've pulled together a massive stack of sources for this deep dive.
We really had to dig deep.
We did. We are looking at comprehensive industry timelines. We've got cultural and critical analyses, raw streaming data, Billboard chart histories, and crucially, we have these incredibly detailed records of online conversations, fan narratives, and the digital footprints of these fan bases.
Because you can't tell the story without the internet.
No, you really can't. Our mission today is to decode the defining narrative of Nicki Minaj and Cardi B.
Yeah.
We want to understand the actual underlying mechanics driving the headlines you see on your timeline every single day.
Right.
Like, why exactly didn't Nicki's highly anticipated March 2026 album drop on the date she announced?
Exactly.
And why did the rollout for Cardi B's Sophomore album take over 7 agonizingly long years? And ultimately, how does the corporate machinery of the music industry actually weaponize these timelines against the artists themselves?
And before we get into the weeds of all that data and history, I want to establish some very, very firm ground rules for you, the listener.
Please do. This is so important.
We are looking at this entirely from a bird's eye view. We are not here to take sides. We are not here to declare a winner or a loser.
Right.
And we are absolutely not participating in the fan wars. Our goal is to analyze the verifiable historical facts of their careers and then objectively examine that massive cloud of online speculation that surrounds them.
Yeah, we have to separate the two.
We do. When we get into things like allegations of industry sabotage or, chart manipulation, we are going to be very, very clear about distinguishing what is a documented, verifiable fact and what is just an unverified narrative born from the trenches of online discourse.
That distinction is just paramount. I mean, the online conversation, the fan theories, the allegations, that is a crucial part of the ecosystem we are studying today. It absolutely drives the media narrative.
For sure.
But it is vital that we treat those online narratives as exactly what they are, which is a reflection of modern internet culture and high-stakes fandom.
Yeah.
It's not confirmed reality unless we have the hard data to back it up.
Right.
We are here to understand why these narratives exist, not to validate them as gospel.
Exactly. We are looking at the architecture of the whole thing and to understand the absolute madness of how we arrived at today's landscape. We can't just look at the penthouse. We have to look at how the foundations were poured.
We have to go back.
We need to go back to the origins. So set the scene for me. When we talk about the beginning of Nicki Minaj's modern era, what does that landscape actually look like? What year are we even looking at here?
Okay, so we need to anchor ourselves in 2007.
Okay.
And this is a really important contextual leap for you as a listener, especially if your primary experience with music has always just been through, like, Spotify or Apple Music.
Yeah, it was a different world.
Completely different. In 2007, the concept of a mixtape was entirely different from what it is today. It wasn't just a playlist of original songs uploaded to a streaming service.
Right.
The mixtape circuit was the underground. It was this highly competitive, gritty proving ground.
Wait, break that down for me, because today an artist just records a song in their bedroom, clicks a button through a distributor, and boom, it's on a global platform.
Right, it's instant.
So how did a mixtape actually function back in 2007?
It was incredibly labor-intensive. Artists would literally take the instrumental tracks of the biggest hit songs on the radio. We're talking songs by established male artists, usually.
Just ripping the beats.
Ripping the beats, exactly. And they would rap over them. The entire goal was to prove, definitively, that you could rap better on their beat than they did.
Oh,
Give
what?
an assertion of absolute dominance. You would record these tracks, burn them onto physical CDs,
Like actual plastic CDs?
actual plastic CDs,
Yeah.
and literally hand them out on the streets, out of the trunks of cars, or host them on early, clunky digital platforms like DatPiff. It was a decentralized, grassroots political campaign, essentially.
Right, that piff. Wow. That takes me back.
Right. And this is exactly the environment where Nicki Minaj released her first major mixtape, Playtime Is Over, in 2007.
So she wasn't just dropping a fully formed commercial album. She was essentially hijacking the existing airwaves to say, look at me, listen to what I can do.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And she didn't just do it once. Playtime Is Over introduced her incredibly sharp lyricism and these wildly animated vocal deliveries. But the grind didn't stop there.
She kept going.
The very next year, 2008, she drops another massive project, Sucka Free.
Right.
And then, the year after that, in 2009, she releases Beam Me Up Scotty.
Yeah.
And that was the mixtape that completely altered her trajectory. It was the paradigm shift.
3 massive projects in 3 years. That is just an exhausting pace.
It is, and it was entirely necessary. The source material emphasizes a point that we really need to underline heavily here. Nicki Minaj was not handed a mainstream career.
No.
She had to meticulously forge it in the fires of these relentless mixtape releases, countless freestyles on underground radio shows, and just an absolute onslaught of strategic guest features on other people's songs.
She was everywhere.
Everywhere. She was operating in an industry that, at the time, was incredibly skeptical of female rappers. The major labels had largely abandoned the idea of a female hip-hop superstar.
Which is wild to think about now.
Right. So she had to systematically overwhelm the industry with undeniable proof of her skill and her marketability.
Okay, so it's like she had to earn a PhD through years of grueling night school, laying the bricks of her career one by one in the dark, and proving herself to every single skeptical professor and peer before they even let her in the building.
That is exactly the dynamic, perfectly said. But then the entire technological and cultural landscape of the world shifts.
As it always does.
Fast forward about a decade to 2016 and 2017. The underground mixtape circuit has largely been replaced by the immediate algorithmic reach of social media. And this is the environment that births the arrival of Cardi B.
Right, and her origin story couldn't be more different from that 2007 mixtape grind, could it?
It is fundamentally different. Cardi B did not start as an underground lyricist babbling on street corners. She transitioned into music from being a highly visible, incredibly viral social media personality. Vine, Instagram, which then led to her becoming a standout star on reality television. She possessed this wildly unfiltered personality, just a raw, magnetic charisma that made her instantly recognizable and deeply beloved by millions of people before she ever formally dropped a commercial studio album.
That's the crazy part. She already had the audience. She just needed to give them a product.
Exactly. And in 2017, she delivered that product with Bodak Yellow.
Oh, man.
And we cannot overstate what a cultural explosion that single was. It bypassed the traditional gradual climb and just erupted.
It was everywhere.
It became a massive, undeniable global hit, and it essentially launched her directly into mainstream A-list superstar status overnight.
It's fascinating. If you look at it, if Nicki's blueprint was the grueling brick-by-brick PhD program, Cardi's blueprint was like holding a winning viral lottery ticket that instantly grants you the key to the penthouse suite.
Right.
Both methods get you into the exact same executive boardroom at the top of the skyscraper. You are both undeniably at the top. But here's what I don't understand and what I really want you to explain to me. Does the method of entry permanently alter how the industry treats you once you are actually inside that boardroom?
That is the defining question of this entire deep dive.
Okay.
Yes, it absolutely alters how you are treated, but more importantly, it dictates the kind of armor you wear.
The armor.
Yeah, let's look at the psychology of it. Because Nicki had to build her empire brick by brick over years in the underground, she developed an elite level of technical lyricism. But beyond the music, she developed an iron grip on strategic control.
Makes sense.
She understands exactly how the motor of the music industry works because she literally mixed it herself. She knows where the structural weaknesses are, she knows who holds the levers of power, and she knows how quickly an artist can be discarded.
Yeah.
Her grind built a protective, highly defensive shell around her art.
Because if you build the building yourself, you know exactly where the load-bearing walls are, you know how it can be torn down.
Precisely. Now, contrast that protective shell with Cardi's lightning-fast rise. Her path was a masterclass in modern media leverage. I mean, Bypassing the underground grind is an incredible feat.
Huge.
But taking the elevator straight to the penthouse introduces a completely different kind of danger. With Bodak Yellow, she was immediately subjected to the crushing microscopic pressure of being at the absolute pinnacle of the industry, but without having had the time or the obscure space to make mistakes in the shadows.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, if you are developing your sound on a mixtape in 2007 and a song flops, only a few thousand people in the underground know about it, you just move on to the next track.
Right, nobody cares.
But if your very first major single is the biggest song in the world, your very next move is scrutinized by millions of people and multinational corporate sponsors.
Exactly. The industry suddenly expects you to operate with the structural integrity, the emotional resilience, and the strategic foresight of a 10-year veteran, even though you just walked through the front door.
That's tough.
It is an impossible, suffocating standard.
So we have two completely different foundational experiences here. But that lack of underground shielding isn't the only structural issue. Even with Nicki's armor, even with her undeniable dominance, she ran into a completely different kind of wall.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to talk about what happens when you conquer the culture, but the institutions refuse to acknowledge you.
Yes. The institutional friction. This is where the narrative takes a very dark turn regarding how the music business operates. Let's look at the data from 2010 to roughly 2014.
Okay, lay the numbers out for me. How big was she during this window?
She was virtually untouchable. She releases her debut studio album, Pink Friday, in 2010. Massive commercial breakthrough. She follows it up with Pink Friday, Roman Reloaded, and then Pink Print. During this half-decade, she isn't just a successful rapper. She is stacking global pop hits.
Yeah, she was crossing over.
Totally crossing over.
Yeah.
She is breaking long-standing Billboard chart records that have been held by legends for decades. She definitively becomes the most successful, most emulated female rapper of her generation. Culturally, commercially, aesthetically, she was the center of gravity.
Okay, so the culture has voted with their wallets, their streams, and their attention.
Unquestionably.
But then we hit this paradox that I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. Despite the staggering resume, despite nearly 20 years of shaping the cultural zeitgeist, she has 0 Grammy Awards.
0.
How does a disconnect this massive actually happen? I mean, explain the mechanics of this to me. How does a voting body look at the most dominant force in their industry and just ignore her?
To understand this, we have to pull back the curtain on how legacy institutions like the Recording Academy actually function. Academies are not objective algorithms.
Right.
They do not just look at a spreadsheet of sales and hand out trophies. They are made up of human beings with historical biases, deeply entrenched ideas of what constitutes prestige, and unwritten rules of industry decorum.
So it's subjective.
Highly subjective. Furthermore, the Grammy voting process, especially during that crucial 2010 to 2014 window, relied heavily on secretive nominating committees.
Secret committees?
Yeah, these committees had the power to override the general voting body to curate the final ballot.
So it's a closed-door political system.
Exactly. It's highly political, and Nicki Minaj has been very vocal about her experiences with this system. According to the source material, she has publicly stated that she was actively mistreated by the Recording Academy.
How so?
Well, she claimed her music was deliberately placed into incorrect genre categories.
Wait, pause. Why does the category matter? If it's a great song, shouldn't it just win?
The category is everything. If you submit a pure rap track, but the committee forces it into a pop category filled with traditional acoustic ballads.
Oh, I see.
Right, the voting bloc in that specific category is highly unlikely to vote for it. They don't historically reward that sound. It fundamentally alters the mathematical probability of an artist winning.
That's incredibly frustrating.
And beyond the categorizations, Nicki has also alleged that she was essentially punished by the institution for refusing to comply with specific demands from Grammy telecast producers regarding her performances.
So she refused to play the political game. She refused to kiss the ring.
And historical legacy institutions rarely, if ever, reward artists who refuse to be managed, contained, or directed by them.
Wow.
But what we really need to examine is the psychological fallout of this institutional rejection. Imagine achieving the highest possible metrics of success-shattering sales records, dictating fashion, packing arenas worldwide, and the governing body of your profession still refuses to validate you as a master of your craft.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. If you are making millions of dollars and you have arenas full of people screaming your lyrics, why do you even need the trophy? Who cares what a secret committee thinks if the fans love you?
It's a fair question,
Mm,
but it ignores the reality of how history is written. Trophies are the shorthand for legacy.
that's true.
When documentaries are made 50 years from now, they list the accolades. But more immediately, the lack of institutional validation forces an artist into a very isolating defensive posture.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the biggest, most powerful institution in music is operating with perceived bias against you, who else is operating against you? It validates every fear of industry sabotage.
Oh, wow. It breeds paranoia.
Exactly. It forces an artist to rely entirely on fan-driven metrics, chart numbers, first-week sales, tour revenue, and their own internal moral compass as the only true measures of success, because they realize the traditional grading rubric is fundamentally rigged against them.
That makes total sense. It creates this hyper-vigilance. You realize the establishment won't protect my legacy, so I have to protect it myself with absolute ruthlessness.
Right.
And that complete lack of institutional shielding is exactly what created the opening for the media frenzy we saw next. This brings us to the absolute powder keg of our timeline. We have to look at the year 2018.
2018 is the flashpoint. This is the year the pressure cooker finally blew. Let's look at the releases. Nicki drops her highly anticipated album, Queen.
Okay.
And if you look strictly at the musical analysis in our source material, this album was a lyrical powerhouse. It showcased immense versatility. Her pen game was arguably sharper than ever.
She was rapping her heart out.
But the music almost became secondary. The rollout was engulfed in intense controversy, massive debates over chart rules, and a shockingly aggressive, unified media narrative.
The headlines from that era are wild to look back on. Critics and blogs were pushing this highly coordinated narrative that Nicki Minaj was finished, that she was canceled, or that she had officially been replaced.
Right.
And I just don't get it. If I look at the raw data you provided, she was still moving massive units. Her fan engagement was through the roof. Why was the media writing obituaries for a career that was clearly still generating millions of dollars?
Because the media narrative wasn't happening in a vacuum. It intensified so rapidly in 2018 for one specific reason. This was the exact moment Cardi B released her debut studio album, Invasion of Privacy, and fully cemented her superstar status.
Okay, Invasion of Privacy drops. It's an undeniable commercial juggernaut. Great singles, a massive promotional machine behind it.
Huge.
But the media reaction wasn't just, wow, what a great debut album from a new artist. Almost instantaneously, every major blog, every music publication began comparing her directly to Nicki Minaj.
Yeah.
They started explicitly declaring Cardi the new queen of rap, and she was literally only one album into her career.
Just one.
The sources we are working from are very clear on this. This sudden, vicious comparison was not an organic cultural shift driven by the listeners. It was heavily artificially amplified by the media ecosystem.
And this brings us to a crucial concept we really need to unpack for the listener today. Industry framing.
Break that down.
This is one of the most insidious, financially motivated tactics used in entertainment journalism. The music industry and the digital media ecosystem that feeds off of it has a documented, decades-long history of framing female artists not as peers, not as colleagues, but as gladiatorial competitors fighting to the death.
But why? I mean, think about male rappers. If we are talking about Drake and Kendrick Lamar or J. Cole and Future, they are just listed on the same Spotify playlist.
Right.
They're allowed to exist simultaneously as titans of the genre. But with women, the media acts like there is literally only one chair in the room. Why does pop culture insist on a strict one-in, one-out policy for women in hip-hop?
Because conflict is the most reliable currency in the digital attention economy.
Wow.
We need to be crystal clear about the motive here. This framing does not benefit the women involved. It does not elevate their art. It purely benefits media engagement. It benefits the platforms.
It's all about clicks.
Exactly. If a blog writes a headline that says, Cardi B releases great debut album, Nicki Minaj, also still very successful, nobody clicks on that.
No one cares.
But if they write, Cardi B dethrones Nicki Minaj, is the queen finished? That generates millions of clicks, thousands of furious comments, retweets, quote tweets, and endless ad revenue.
So they artificially pitted a decade-long legacy against the explosive momentum of a viral debut simply to create a perpetual motion machine of outrage and engagement.
Exactly. The absurdity of the replaced narrative is completely exposed when you look at the raw data from 2018. Nicki was still a global force. But the media needed a villain and a new hero to sell the story.
It's infuriating when you think about it from the perspective of the artist. You spend 10 agonizing years building this skyscraper, and the media decides to literally hand the deed of your building to someone who just walked through the lobby just to see what kind of physical or verbal fight will break out on the timeline.
That's a great way to put it.
But my question is, are we as consumers complicit in this? If the media sets the trap, aren't we the ones stepping in it every time we click the headline?
That is the uncomfortable truth we have to face.
Right.
Yes. The algorithms only serve us what we show an appetite for. And the appetite for female rivalry and pop culture is deeply ingrained.
Sadly true.
But what we really need to examine is how this intense 2018 pressure cooker, this entirely artificial, media-driven collision course, fundamentally altered the psychology of both artists.
Right.
The environment became so toxic, and every single move was so highly scrutinized that it triggered two wildly different survival responses regarding their future music.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating psychological studies in modern music history, the art of the delay.
Let's talk about the delay.
Let's look at what happened after 2018, starting with Cardi. She drops this massive, record-breaking debut. Now, if I'm looking at the standard major label playbook, she should be back with her sophomore album by 2020, right? Strike while the iron is hot.
That is the traditional industry expectation. A 2 to 3 year turnaround to solidify the success of the debut and prove it wasn't a fluke.
But that is not what happened. Instead, we entered an unprecedented period of album silence. From 2018 all the way to 2020, there were some scattered singles, some high-profile guest features, but no complete project.
Right.
And Cardi herself started speaking very openly on social media about the crippling anxiety she was feeling. She talked about the intense pressure, this paralyzing need for the second album to be absolutely universally perfect.
The sophomore slump is a well-documented phenomenon.
Yeah.
But we have to contextualize it within the industry framing we just discussed.
Okay.
When your debut album wasn't just praised, but was actively weaponized by the global media to crown you the new queen and dethrone a legend, the weight of that second album becomes almost mythological.
Oh.
It's no longer just a collection of songs. It is a referendum on your legitimacy. You add in massive personal life changes, heavy corporate label expectations, and unverified but persistent online rumors about internal disagreements over creative direction, and you have a recipe for creative paralysis.
But it wasn't total silence, which is what makes it so confusing. In 2020, she drops WAP. And WAP wasn't just a hit song, it was a cultural earthquake. It was everywhere.
Everywhere.
Then in 2021, she drops Up, which is another massive chart-topping hit. So if you are a fan, you are thinking, okay, the engines are firing, the rollout has begun, the album is right around the corner.
But the album did not arrive. Those massive singles led nowhere in terms of a larger project. The album became this phantom entity, and a major factor here is how rapidly the streaming landscape was shifting during this delay.
The algorithms were changing.
Constantly. The algorithms that drove viral success in 2018 were vastly different from the TikTok-dominated algorithms of 2022 and 2023. When you delay for years, the ground beneath you is constantly moving. You are trying to hit a target that changes position every 6 months.
Okay, so that is the defensive delay, a delay born of pressure and shifting landscapes. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at Nicki's camp during this same period.
Let's do it.
After the chaos of 2018, Nicki eventually releases Pink Friday 2 in late 2023. And let's look at the numbers you brought for this. It debuts with massive numbers, over 228,000 units sold in its first week.
Which, crucially, completely debunked the 2018 media narrative that she was finished. It proved her absolute enduring dominance.
Right, but then the timeline gets incredibly interesting. On September 24, 2025, Nicki announces her next album, and she gives a highly specific, definitive release date, March 27, 2026.
Right.
And I remember this vividly. The internet was braced for it, but March 27, 2026 comes and goes, and there is no album.
No album.
Now, hold on. If any other artist in the world sets a firm release date and completely misses it, we just call it disorganized. We call it a missed deadline. But according to the source material here, her fans didn't see it that way at all. Why does she get a pass?
Because according to the intensive online conversation and the historical pattern recognized by longtime fans, Nicki rarely releases albums on the exact dates she initially announces.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The fan narrative, and again, we must stress this is an unverified online theory, is that she does this entirely strategically. They view it as a tactical decoy.
Explain the theory to me. How does missing a deadline help you?
The theory posits that in an industry she views as actively hostile and filled with saboteurs, which remember stems from her early institutional friction we talked about. She announces a fake date to flush out the opposition.
Wow.
If she announces March 27th, she watches to see which competing artists suddenly rush to drop singles on that day, or which platforms mysteriously change their playlisting rules that week. She sets a trap to expose the machinery moving against her.
That is intense.
It is. Furthermore, she has been incredibly vocal about her strict morals and values regarding her business. She has stated she refuses to release music unless the rollout aligns perfectly with her principles and her standards of quality.
Okay, I have to push back on this, though.
Oh.
Are we really buying this 3D chess explanation? Isn't it just incredibly convenient to call a missed deadline a tactical decoy?
That's the debate.
I mean, we see fans online weaponizing the word delay against both of these artists equally, throwing it back and forth as an insult. But are these two situations actually comparable? Is setting a decoy date to trick invisible industry opponents really the same thing as being paralyzed by the trophy of your own debut album for 7 years?
But the analytical conclusion drawn from our sources is a firm no. They are not comparable in the slightest.
Okay.
We are looking at an offensive maneuver versus a defensive struggle. Nicki's delay is framed by her and her supporters as an offensive strategy. It is an exertion of control. It's about tactical misdirection, maintaining absolute sovereignty over her intellectual property, and refusing to be dictated to by standard industry calendars. She's playing a game of industrial espionage with her own release dates.
Whereas Cardi's delay is the defensive struggle.
Exactly. Cardi's delay was about the very human fear of not living up to an impossible standard, navigating a terrifyingly fast-shifting streaming landscape, and trying to find the right creative footing when the entire world is watching your every stumble.
That's a lot of pressure.
The source material is unequivocal on this point. Critics cannot logically compare the two timelines. You cannot equate a 20-year track record of consistent, high-level, foundational output that features an occasional strategic date shift to a singular viral debut album followed by a paralyzing 7-year gap. The timelines and the psychology behind them are fundamentally incompatible.
Which brings us to the inevitable climax of this timeline, the present day and the highly, highly scrutinized result of that defensive 7-year wait. Let's talk about the actual release of Cardi's sophomore album, Am I the Drama?
When an artist delays an album for over 7 years, a fascinating psychological shift happens in the audience.
What happened?
The album ceases to be just a collection of recorded songs. It becomes a mythological object. The expectations placed on Am I the Drama were quite literally mathematically impossible to meet. No arrangement of audio frequencies could have satisfied a 7-year buildup.
And when it finally did drop, the reception was complicated, to say the least.
Yeah.
The sources note that many listeners felt the album sounded rushed, which is incredibly ironic for a project that took 7 years. The general consensus was that the tracklist was uneven and that the sheer length of the wait did not match the sonic quality of the final product.
This is the ultimate danger of a massive time gap in modern music. The cultural context shifts entirely. A beat, a flow, or a lyrical concept that would have sounded revolutionary and fresh in 2020 sounds incredibly dated by the time it actually releases in late 2025 or 2026.
But the music itself quickly became secondary to the numbers game. And this is where the online narratives get vicious and where the industry mechanisms get really complex.
Let's look at the metrics.
Cardi's Am I the Drama debuted with around 199,000 units sold in its first week. Now, in a vacuum, a normal person looks at that and says, wow, almost 200,000 copies? That's a massive success.
That is a massive number.
But we are not in a vacuum. We are in the gladiator arena the media built. So immediately, that 199,000 is compared to the 228,000 units Nicki did with Pink Friday 2. And this sparked massive, unconfirmed online allegations that Cardi's entire desperate rollout strategy was specifically, singularly aimed at trying to outsell Nicki's first week.
We must pause here and emphasize heavily for you listening. Claims regarding an artist's personal, internal intentions are entirely unverified online fan theories.
I can't know what she was thinking.
We cannot know her intent. However, the mechanical structure of how the album was released provided an enormous amount of mathematical fuel for those theories. Specifically, we need to talk about the release of what was labeled the ultimate version of the album.
Yes. The ultimate version. This is where I need you to explain the technical mechanics to me. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Because according to the allegations, fans noticed that older hits, specifically WAP from 2020 and Up from 2021, were suddenly added to the digital track list of this brand new album.
Right.
The theory is that this was done intentionally to wildly inflate the album's first week streaming numbers. How does a song from 3 years ago count toward an album sold today? How does bundling actually work?
It comes down to a metric called equivalent album units,
Yeah.
which was created by Billboard and the RIAA to adapt to the streaming era. Because people don't buy physical CDs as much anymore, the industry had to figure out how many Spotify or Apple Music streams equal one actual album sale.
Okay, so what is the math on that?
The current math is roughly 1,500 premium streams of a song equals one album sale.
1,500. Okay.
So if an artist releases a brand new album with 10 brand new songs, they need those new songs to generate millions of streams in 7 days to get a high chart position.
That makes sense.
But there is a loophole. If an artist tacks a massive multi-platinum hit from 3 or 4 years ago onto the end of the new album's track list, the algorithm incorporates the historical accumulated data or the ongoing passive streams of that old hit into the new project's total equivalent units.
That is wild. It's like being handed a massive final term paper assignment and the professor gives you 7 years of extensions.
Exact?
And when you finally hand it in, the professor realizes that half the pages are just essays you wrote and got graded on 3 years ago, just stitched together with a new introduction. It might technically meet the page count requirement, but is it a cohesive, brand new piece of work?
That analogy perfectly captures the frustration of the consumer. It artificially bolsters the debut metrics. And it fuels the toxic fan wars, because one side feels the other is literally cheating the math to claim the crown.
Oh, I bet.
Furthermore, there were unverified rumors that Cardi faced intense pressure from her corporate label to just release something, anything, regardless of whether she felt it was creatively finished, just so she could finally go on a lucrative worldwide tour and generate live revenue for the corporation.
Which raises such a depressing question. Are we even measuring the music anymore? Or have we just become obsessed spreadsheet accountants arguing over equivalent unit ratios for these massive fan bases?
What's truly fascinating from a sociological standpoint is why fans willingly become these spreadsheet accountants. It traces all the way back to the institutional failure we discussed at the beginning.
The Grammys.
Yes, when legacy institutions like the Grammys fail to provide objective, trusted validation, the fans take it upon themselves to declare the ultimate victor. They use Billboard chart rules, Spotify streaming data, and YouTube views as their ammunition in a proxy war for cultural dominance.
They are trying to build the awards podium themselves.
Exactly. The claims of intentional mathematical inflation specifically to beat Nicki are completely unverified, but the mere fact that the narrative dominates the discourse proves how deeply the media's rivalry framing has infected how we consume the art.
We aren't listening to the songs.
We are auditing the ledgers.
And if those unverified rumors about label pressure are true, that she was forced to drop a patched-together album just to secure a tour, it highlights a tragic reality of the industry. The immense corporate pressure to generate touring revenue might force artists to release art they know in their gut isn't perfectly ready.
Right.
Contrast that agonizing compromise with Nicki's ironclad protective grip on her releases, where she absolutely refuses to drop a project until it aligns with her principles, even if it means missing a highly publicized date and facing backlash.
It perfectly illustrates the difference between being driven by the corporate machine and attempting to ruthlessly drive the machine yourself.
So, if we zoom out from the artists for a second and look at the whole picture, we really have to look at the ecosystem fueling this entire saga. We have to look at the puppeteers in the VIP boxes.
Synthesizing all the data, timelines, and media reports we've discussed today, we inevitably return to the core truth outlined in our sources. The music industry has a long, highly profitable, and entirely deliberate history of framing female artists as competitors in a zero-sum game.
Let's review the facts.
Nicki and Cardi's careers unfolded in entirely different technological eras. They utilized vastly different blueprints and paths to achieve success. They represent completely different archetypes of what a hip-hop star can be.
Right. They aren't even playing the same sport, in a way. One is an underground lyricist who built an empire. The other is a viral charismatic force who captured the zeitgeist.
Yet the industry machinery forcibly positioned them in a gladiatorial arena. And the tragedy is that the fans took that artificial narrative and ran with it to the absolute extreme.
They really did.
The online fan narratives we've tracked are practically a separate, self-sustaining industry at this point. The constant claims of sabotage, the endless detailed theories of chart manipulation, the deep dives into hidden competitive motives in every lyric or outfit choice.
It's exhausting just to read about.
The source material makes it a point to emphasize that almost none of these claims are confirmed. They do not reflect verified reality. They reflect the toxicity of internet fandom and the paranoia induced by a hyper-competitive system.
It is crucial that we recognize this. The narrative of rivalry does not empower women in hip-hop. It isolates them. It keeps them paranoid. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it feels exactly like we are watching a Roman gladiator arena.
It really does.
The fans are up in the stadium seats, screaming, holding up their spreadsheets, throwing digital weapons down into the sand. The industry executives, the streaming platform CEOs, and the media promoters are sitting comfortably in the shaded VIP box, collecting all the ticket sales, the ad revenue, and the data.
Profiting off all of it.
And the artists. The artists are the only ones down in the dirt, taking the actual emotional and psychological hits. Are we, as consumers, the ones keeping the arena open?
That is the most important question for anyone who consumes pop culture today. We have to critically evaluate our own media diet. When you accept an unverified online theory as factual ammunition in a fan war, when you click the clickbait headline comparing their first week sales, you are actively participating in the exact framing the industry uses to exploit these artists.
You're feeding the machine.
The ultimate tragedy of this two-decade saga is that the rivalry narrative acts as a massive, profitable smokescreen. It distracts us from acknowledging the incredible, deeply individual and historic achievements of both women.
We get so caught up in the fight over the crown that we forget to look at the empires they actually built.
Precisely. As our foundational sources conclude, Nicki Minaj's career should be defined and studied for her unprecedented longevity, her sheer resilience against institutional bias, and her masterful, albeit controversial, strategic control over her art. And Cardi B's career should be studied as a phenomenon of a meteoric, fast rise, followed by a deeply human, highly visible struggle with immense pressure, resulting in a sophomore album that became a victim of its own mythology. The rivalry narrative benefits the industry's bottom line. It serves absolutely no benefit to the artists themselves.
Man, what an unbelievable journey this has been. We have traced the completely separate paths of an underground, brick-by-brick grinder and an overnight viral sensation.
Yeah.
We've seen exactly how institutional pushback, the complete lack of awards recognition, and predatory, financially motivated media narratives force them onto a massive, unavoidable collision course.
A collision course they didn't even set.
And we've examined how there are vastly different approaches to delayed albums. One, an offensive, strategic decoy designed to expose the machine. The other, a defensive, pressure-filled struggle to survive it, reveal exactly how women are forced to navigate an industry that is, frankly, ruthless to them.
We've talked extensively today about how the system profits off keeping these two powerhouses at odds. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a different perspective. Something to mull over on your own time.
What's that?
We know the industry spends vast amounts of energy and corporate money monetizing these fan-driven wars, working tirelessly to keep female artists isolated in separate corners of the ring. But consider this. If this system wasn't so deeply invested in monetizing the conflict, what kind of groundbreaking, world-shifting collaborative art are we completely missing out on?
Wow.
What kind of music, what kind of cultural moments could have been created if the industry simply allowed them to coexist as peers rather than forcing them to be combatants?
That is a phenomenal, heartbreaking question. Imagine the kind of skyscraper they could have built if they had poured the concrete together.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope that the next time you see a highly anticipated album drop, or the next time you see one get mysteriously delayed on your timeline, you'll look past the sensational headlines.
Question everything you read.
You'll question the spreadsheet metrics, and you'll remember the vastly different blueprints buried deep beneath the building. Until next time.